Hello, folks. Welcome once again to the Hour of the Time. I'm your host, William Cooper. Many of you have been calling wondering why so many reruns have been played over the last couple of weeks. And I think if your ears are good, you have already figured it out. I've been very ill. In fact, for several days, I could not speak at all. I'm just beginning to recover my voice, and I'm not supposed to be talking. And if I talk for very long, I'm going to lose it again. So you're going to hear an interview tonight that you've never heard before. This was actually taped on September the 21st, 1992, in Phoenix, Arizona. The guest tonight is Jim Mosley, who has been involved in the research of the UFO phenomena for many, many years. So that's what you're going to be listening to. For those of you who have called worried about me and about my illness, I thank you. It makes me feel very, very good to know that so many of you are so concerned about my health. I also had on my message service, I left a message speaking just about in the same voice that you're hearing now, that I had been ill. And people would listen to this and at the end say, when are you going to have some new shows? How come we've got so many reruns? All I can say is that's the sheeple factor coming out in somebody. It just is beyond me how somebody could listen to that message and still ask a question like that. But anyway, on we go. I want you to stay tuned, folks, this Wednesday night for a very important show about the IRS. You see, we're the only show in the whole world, radio, television, or anywhere that's ever exposed the IRS and the Federal Reserve for what they really are. And now they're starting to practice damage control. And I want you to pay attention who is putting out the damage control. Remember that you weren't hearing anything on radio about the National Rifle Association until I came out and said, if you join the NRA, you've registered your guns. Now you're starting to hear big ads on certain talk shows about the NRA trying to work their damage control. And then on the Wednesday night, the same Wednesday night that we do our IRS show, a famous talk show personality had someone from the IRS whistleblowers practicing damage control. I got news for you, folks. The IRS is in charge of the whistleblowers. And if you work for the IRS and you want to blow the whistle, if you go to them, I guarantee you'll be in jail tomorrow. Understand that. None of them quoted any points of law. They didn't quote any of the IRS rules or regulations. They didn't give you real answers. And I really liked that one answer about, is the IRS really an agency of the federal government or is it a private organization? He said, well, the IRS has always been autonomous. He didn't give a real answer. Folks, I'm going to try to get that guy on this show. I want him on this show. I'm going to interview him by phone if he's got the guts. And we're going to talk about points in law, specific points. And I'm going to bury that guy under his own bullshit. Because that's exactly what it is. Remember, they're starting to show their true colors. And the only place you're going to hear the real nitty-gritty is on this show and nowhere else. On the other shows, when people ask you about the Freemasons, they dance around and say, oh, it couldn't possibly be a conspiracy. Freemasons aren't involved. Someday I'm going to get an expert in Freemasonry on this show, and we're going to cover it, but they never do. And when they do, the person that's the expert will be a Freemason. Mark my word, folks. Now, I'd like to talk some more. I got a lot to talk about, my trip to England, everything, but I can't. I just can't. I hope you'll understand. The doctor has given me orders to shut my mouth, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So listen to this interview. It's a good interview. I think you'll like it. And if you're interested in the UFO phenomenon at all, you're really going to like it. If you're not, I think you better listen to it, and you better get interested in UFO phenomena because it's got something to do with all of our futures. So without further ado, folks, here's the interview I did in September the 21st, 1992 in Phoenix, Arizona at, I forget what hotel, I think it was the Holiday Inn Hotel, with James Mosley, the publisher of a very sarcastic and satirical newsletter called Saucer Smear.
Hello, folks, and once again, welcome to the Hour of the Time. We have a guest this evening who has been involved for many years in what some call the UFO community or the UFO research community. He has a publication called Saucer Smear that is disseminated to a few select individuals. How he chooses these individuals, I do not know, but one arrives in my mailbox religiously. And I think Jim has some insights into the UFO phenomenon that may not have occurred to you, our listener. And I think that I value his opinion. We have met at many of the conferences around the country, which I go to, and sometimes as a featured speaker, sometimes just as a passionately interested observer. But Jim, welcome to the Hour of the Time.
Well, thank you for having me, Bill. I'm glad to be here.
What got you started in your interest in UFOs?
Well, way back in 1953, when I was a young, innocent person, or relatively so, I met a professional writer, and I was just trying to sort of break into writing, and he knew that I had an interest in UFOs, a vague interest, and we got talking about it, and he said that if I went around the country and did the legwork, so to speak, and interviewed all these people that had been in those early UFO books and tried to get to the bottom of the UFO subject, then he would co-author a book with me, a real professional book. And that sounded real good to me, and I wanted an excuse to go do this anyway. So I took my car, and I had some time and money. I went for about 3.5, 4 months in the latter part of 53 into early 54, and I interviewed 200 or 300 people who had been written up as contactees or as ordinary people who had made sightings or as scientists who had commented on the subject of life on other planets or anybody like that. And then I got all this data together, and then we never did do the book, is the punchline there. But that led to my original publication called Saucer News, which I began in 1954, and continued for quite a number of years, and then finally dropped in the 70s, early 70s, and then, make a long story short, I came back into it again in a way that more suits my own personality, which is I'm not really interested in sightings anymore, especially after all these years. I'm interested in the personalities and the new aspects of the subjects that come along, such as abductions or MJ-12 or Area 51, which is your specialty. All these things excite and interest me, but I mean, a lot of it bores the hell out of me too. So I do it my way in my magazine and let the other people take care of the sightings and what I call the mundane stuff.
When you first were introduced to people who said that they had talked to someone from another planet or that they had experienced a UFO sighting, I know that was many years ago, and your ideas and your attitude has certainly changed. I know that too. But what was your first response to these people? I mean, could you sit there and really look them in the eye and keep a straight face and believe what they said, or were you the reluctant skeptic, or how would you explain your reaction to what you were hearing?
Well, I'll tell you, that's a good question. I remember the George Adamski case, which was the biggest one of the early 50s. I first read about that. Somebody sent me a newspaper clipping from Boston. I don't know why it was from there. It talked about this professor from Mount Palomar and a doctor who I assume to be an MD, and I think 5 other people who accompanied him on this desert contact, which was the first incident that George Adamski had. And I thought, oh my God, if it's a professor from Mount Palomar, a medical doctor, and these other people, one was a radio specialist, and they all sounded very high class. And I thought, well, if they're saying that they met a spaceman on the desert, I should believe it, I suppose. But then I got more into it, and George Adamski lived near Mount Palomar. Professor was self-appointed, or at least appointed by his friends and fans. George Hunt Williamson had a self-appointed doctorate or something that was very close to it. I know he never graduated from the University of Arizona, because I checked that out myself. He had no real degree. And the other people were just amateurs, one was a radio ham and this, that, and the other. So when I got that far with it, I was already getting suspicious. And then one of the people I interviewed on that trip I just mentioned was George Adamski and all but one of his witnesses. Then I started to talk to other background people that knew them and had something to add. And then I wrote an expose. So I went all the way from the first flush of believing it, and I did have the will to believe. I think we all have. Wouldn't it be wonderful, if it were true?
Sure.
But by the time I finished with George Adamski, I didn't believe a word of it, but I always did like him. And that's another thing that I think you understand. I kind of make 2 columns, and they have to overlap a little bit. But one is the guy's story. Do I take it seriously? Do I think it's true? Very often the answer is no. But on the other hand, the same guy, like you and I, for instance, we might just be friends without that. Because I go by what he's like and how he treats me and how he seems to treat other people. And if he's been to Venus on the side, well, I just try not to hold that against him, that's all. Like that fellow we were just sitting with down at the pool. Sure. He's been underground in Mars. Other than that, he seems fine. Mm-hmm. So I won't hold that against him.
I sort of divide it the same way, only I have another column that's harmless or benevolent. If they're benevolent and they've been underground on Mars, or they walked on the sun and talked to...
Walking on the sun is especially hard, you know that?
And they're still nice people and don't seem to be harming anybody, that's okay. If they seem to be malevolent or malicious in their intent, then it's pretty hard for me to be friends with those kinds of...
Well, I agree, sometimes it does. I mean, maybe we shouldn't just name a couple that I feel that their story isn't good and their personal conduct isn't good either, and so then I just don't like them. I mean,
sure.
Well, Bud Hopkins comes to mind. Not that you asked, but...
Well, Bud Hopkins is a favorite subject of mine. In fact, in my book, I documented where he was practicing, in effect, psychotherapy on these people who claim to have been abducted, holding actual group therapy sessions, and has no psychological degrees or training or expertise whatsoever, and a doctor who he had conned into getting in there to help him with this stuff, brought this to the attention of the state medical board in New York State. And what happened is they never did investigate Bud Hopkins. They took the medical license away from the doctor who made the complaint.
That sounds like part of it. No, I had somebody I was talking to the other day, we were talking about Bud Hopkins, and I said, as an artist, which is what he's supposed to be, how can he be practicing psychiatry? And this guy came up with a line that I wish I'd come up with. He said, well, he must have heard that psychiatry is an art, and so it's just part of his artistic work.
Technically, he's absolutely right, because psychology is not a science.
You're right.
It is an art, and the art seems to change with the artist.
You got it.
There are so many theories about the practice of psychology that you could take your pick, and who knows what's what.
Well, I've known psychologists and psychiatrists professionally and socially, quite a lot of them. I've been on 5-hour radio shows with big psychiatrists in New York City, and my general conclusion is they're at least as crazy as we are. Most of them, at least.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one study, well, I thought this was the most interesting study of all the studies I've ever looked at in my life, showed that psychologists generally pick the field because they feel that there's something mentally wrong with them, and they hope to be able to treat themselves and thus keep it a secret. from their family and their friends.
You're very close. I've heard that, and I think there's a lot of truth in it.
And at one point, they had the highest suicide rate of all the professions. And I don't think that's true anymore, but at one point, it certainly was true.
I've heard that too.
Jim, over the years, what have you come to think about this whole field in general?
Well, that's a hard one. There's an awful lot of nonsense. There has to be a germ of truth somewhere. My personal opinion is that insofar as any of this is real, we are dealing with a genuine mystery which is beyond our present-day science. And very simply, as we all know, science has to have an event which can be duplicated under controlled conditions. If you do a certain thing under conditions A through X, right, and you write up a paper on it, and another scientist reads it, and he sets up conditions A through X, same thing happens again, so you're okay. But when you have a UFO sighting, or a psychic experience, or an abduction, or any of these things that are in the weird realm, you might say, they happen, let's assume, but you can't make it happen again under the same conditions. You can't duplicate it. So it boils down to the person's word. You choose to believe them or you don't, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not real or it isn't true on some level. And I think as good as science is in theory, and as good as our scientific method is, having gotten us to the moon and done real things, there is something lacking in it. It's going to have to be improved and modified. And someday, perhaps long after we're gone, I would assume and hope that they're going to find out what all this is about and prove it scientifically, whatever is behind all this. It's not from another planet. I think that's extremely unlikely. More likely, something within our own environment, another dimension, which is a stupid way of putting it, but a lot of people put it that way. I don't know what that quite means. It just means we don't understand. It's something we don't understand, and we're not likely to. And if we did understand it, we still couldn't prove it. So you come to a convention like this, and you hear people talk. Each guy has a different starting point. Each guy has a different ending point. But not one of them can prove scientifically any reasonable fraction of what he's saying. So it's his opinion. And if you like it, you listen to it. And if you don't like it, you go to the pool, which is what I was about to do a minute ago.
Until I grabbed you.
Right.
But what about the historical perspective? Do you believe that this interpretation of historical events to show that intervention from these people who supposedly ride around in these flying discs or egg-shaped craft or the many different ways that they've been described, do you think that that's a correct interpretation, or do you think that that's...
You're asking if you do. I think that space people have interfered with our past history on Earth.
Not necessarily space people, but whoever this is. In other words, if someone back in ancient times wrote that something came down out of the sky and talked to them, and this was God, and any way that you want to interpret that, do you think that that's a literal interpretation, that someone did come from the sky and talk to this person and could have been extraterrestrial, or somebody from the future, if time travel is real, or
I'm going to beg the question. It's possible, but it's unproven. I'm an amateur archaeologist as well as being interested in UFOs, and I've dug for artifacts in Peru years ago and picked up a little archaeology as I went along. I've never studied it or anything. But a few things come to mind. You know, someone like Von Daniken comes along, and he'll look at these designs or drawings or human-like figures on pottery or on cloth or on stones or whatever, and he'll say, well, this looks like a spaceman, and this looks like a guy with a helmet on, and can't you just see that? Well, you know, that's like the old ink blot test. I mean, you can see what you want. If you're determined to believe in spacemen, then you can reinterpret some of these things the way you like, but, conventional archaeologists go to the other extreme. Mm-hmm. They insist Columbus was the first guy to, get here, and he wasn't, and, they have a lot of ideas which are untenable, but they stick to them. So, you can go to either extreme. I think our prehistory is so poorly known and understood, and so little of it has been dug up and properly analyzed, there again you have a mystery area. I don't think there's an answer to that. At least I don't have it. Anything's possible. You wonder, for instance, genetically, how the human race went from a relatively primitive, almost animalistic state, probably not more than 10,000 years ago, and so quickly, 10,000 years in the whole evolution of this planet is just a moment in time. How did we come this far this quickly? Pretty soon, there was the Egyptians who were relatively civilized, and then on up from there, and we're somewhat civilized, perhaps. But that all happened awfully quick, so maybe there was some interference from some other realm. I mean, it's not inconceivable, but it is sure not proven.
It's always interested me in my study of the mystery schools. I find this legend of Lucifer always popping up. Something that fell to earth from the sky and imparted knowledge to man, which they named Lucifer or Satan, and of course the God of the Bible said, you're not supposed to have this knowledge. You don't eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And that's caused us tremendous problems ever since. And nobody really knows what it was that really happened back then. Everybody's asked to take the different interpretations of the different religious schools of thought as an article of faith. And I'm not making judgment on any one of them, and your religion and my religion doesn't have anything to do with this conversation. And I don't want to get into that, but it appears that somewhere in history something happened that man who didn't think before began to think for himself and discover how to grow plants and build cities to protect themselves from each other and animals and make weapons and forge metal out of rock and all kinds of things. One of the things that has always impressed me, and I'm never able to verbalize how impressed I am by this, but my great-grandmother, Grandma Vance, came across the United States in a covered wagon. She didn't have plumbing. She had to pump water up from a well, when they had a well, or get it from a stream or a river. Her first home was a sod house on the prairie in West Texas. She lived through Indian wars and saw several of her neighbors killed by wild Apache Indians, who to them, they didn't consider themselves wild. They were civilized, and here we were taking their land, and they're trying to keep their land.
I was narrow-minded of them.
Very. But anyway, before she died, she had seen all of the technology up to and including the development of the Boeing 707, and it had flown in the sky. Now, this to me is absolutely beyond my wildest dreams. I can't even imagine how she was able to cope with the transition from where she came from to where she ended up, and still have any kind of modicum of sanity left.
Well, what you're saying is that technology is moving so fast, it's like a geometric progression or something. There's no time that we know of in human history that things have changed technically as fast as they are now. And to go on from that, if this continues for just another 100 years, there's no way of imagining, again, if we don't blow ourselves up or overpopulate or do something dreadful, but we today can't really grasp what the world could be like in 100 years.
That's correct, and I think that was one of the main themes of the movie 2001. I think Arthur C. Clarke was trying to tell us that our technology is reaching the point where maybe we can't control it. And that was signified by the whole battle between the astronauts and the computer HAL. The astronauts represented in a microcosm humanity, and HAL represented the sum total of man's technology. And HAL was out of control.
That was a wonderful movie.
It was a tremendously wonderful movie, and it had a lot more in it than just that we don't have time to go into. But I was really impressed by the thinking behind that, and I grasped it, immediately when I was watching the movie. But I was not impressed by the solution, which was to unplug HAL. And that led to, supposedly, in Arthur C. Clarke's mind, a paradigm shift in the collective consciousness of humanity and the birth of the new man, which was signified by the fetus floating in space.
I thought it was unfortunate they had to take them apart, tube by tube. If they ever do build a computer that good, I would hope there'd be a little off and on switch.
Yes.
And then just go click, and he's off.
Wouldn't that have simplified everything?
Wouldn't have been a movie, but it would have been a lot quicker.
That's correct. But there was a real warning there, I think, that maybe we need to heed, because I know that in most of the technologies now, it is almost impossible for any person to understand the whole extent of it. So you have people specializing in small fields.
Absolutely.
Which means that nobody really knows the whole overall picture. And that could very well be used to get people to build something, the end product, which could be used to the detriment of mankind, and none of the people who are building the various parts would actually realize what it was going to be used for.
It's a very good point, and that's not at all impossible. Yeah, I agree with you.
What do you think about the theory that this whole thing might be a manipulation, and that extraterrestrials are not real at all?
Well, now, this is what you've been talking about recently, and I find that a very intriguing theory. For quite a while, I got halfway to where you seem to be, and I was thinking, we're always talking about how the government is trying to suppress UFO information. And first of all, there's a problem there, because, you know, if they're real space people, why they're always going to land where the government can grab them before hardly ever, and, you know, anybody sees them, you know. I mean, they could do it better than that if they really wanted to try. So there's something wrong to begin with, but you know, they make a pretty good case that here, you know, if it wasn't for the government secrecy, we would know the truth, and why can the government do this to us? And then I got thinking, what if it were just the other way around? That they're planting these stories, and they want us to think they're space people, even though there aren't any. But I stopped right there. I never got to where you did, because I couldn't do the second part. What reason would they have? What could be worse than being invaded from another planet? You see, why would they make up something so scary as that, you know, to hide what? I couldn't get to the what, but you come with a plausible answer in a certain way. So I won't say, I agree with you tentatively, which is a polite way of saying I don't know.
Well, you see, I'd never considered this. And when I was exposed to information when I was attached to Austin Naval Officer, I took it at face value as being real, and never dreamed that maybe I was being used to disseminate information to help build a threat that didn't exist. Until, in my research, I'm going back through history, trying to find reference to UFOs in history, and I came across some documents which I thought was very interesting, of the Japanese Imperial delegation that came to the United States in 1917. And there was a speech made by John Dewey, who's touted as the father of our failed education system today, and he's supposed to be a great man, but anybody, to me, who fathers a failure is not a great man. And our education system has certainly failed. If John Dewey is the perpetrator of it, then he's a failure, period. And he's not great in my book. But he made a speech, and the first sentence in his speech to Prime Minister H.O.T.T of the Japanese Imperial delegation was this, quote, "Someone once told me that the best way to unite all humanity in one world government and do away with war forever is if we were attacked by some other species from some other planet," unquote. And I was dumbstruck. It was as somebody had hit me upside the head with a 2x4, and that's what it was. It was a mental 2x4 that shook my thinking around and put it in a different perspective that I'd never considered before. That if these people, these elite, who behind the scenes with their influence and their money and their power can really make things happen, what a one-world government, what better way to get people to cooperate with them than to present the earth with an enemy? Whether it exists or not, the average Joe on the street could never, ever realize the time in his life where he could authenticate it or disprove it, because he would have to trust that the government's telling him the truth, because he can't go into outer space and see for himself.
Whether there's something there or not.
That's right.
Well, Reagan made, 3 or 4 different statements?
Six.
Yeah.
Total.
And who was it? Khrushchev at that time? Or Gorbachev? Gorbachev made similar statements.
Yes.
And to say it once would be reasonable, because it's not a strange thing really to say, but to say it a number of times so people will remember it makes you kind of wonder, yeah.
It's extremely unusual for a president to say anything twice. And they never do that unless there's an extreme emergency at hand, or they want you to get a particular point. There's no question.
Well, it's time for a break, folks. Stand by. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this short pause.
I also found reference to the same thing in a report called the Report from Iron Mountain, which is questionable as to its authenticity, but there is no question as to the genius behind its authorship. Whoever wrote it was a genius, and we definitely spent a good deal of time contemplating the possibility of permanent world peace.
What's the name of this?
The Report from Iron Mountain. Supposedly it was a group of people hired by the government as a think tank, and the first place they met was a corporate records repository underground in solid granite called Iron Mountain.
What year was it?
This was back in the 60s. And the name of the book is the possibility or probability, the desirability and probability of permanent peace, the Report from Iron Mountain. And the whole study of this book is what is the desirability and what is the possibility of permanent peace ever on this earth. And the outcome of the whole book was that, well, to have permanent peace, instead of fighting amongst each other, we must present the earth with an enemy. And the enemy could be pollution.
Yeah.
The enemy could be war. And you could build a world army of anti-war warriors.
Yeah.
Who would spend their whole time inspecting to make sure that nobody's making weapons and that nobody is gearing up for war and stuff like that. In other words, presented all kinds of scenarios for an enemy for the human race. And one of them was an artificial threat from outer space, and it even postulated that some of the harder to explain flying saucer incidents of recent years, recent being when the book was written, could have been experiments along this line. Now, considering the rash of flying saucer movies and incidents back in the 50s that seemed to coincide with each other, and the day the Earth stood still, which was this man bringing this message of peace, all of this seems to fit together. And to me has more validity than probably anything else, although I'm not ruling out the possibility of extraterrestrials or time travel, because one of the very real possibilities is if this is real, then it could be us engineering, or re-engineering, if you will, our own future.
What do you think the objections consist of? That's the thing I have the most trouble with, and I guess it would be true of whichever of the contactees are sincere. I think a lot of them are just making it up, but the ones who are not making it up, and then the vast majority of the abductees who I don't think are consciously making it up. So here you've got people who are probably no crazier than most of us. They're not crazy, that's not the answer. And they seem to be sincere, and they can probably pass lie detector tests and all that. And yet what they're saying is, to me, ludicrous. I can't get beyond that. It doesn't make sense in any of several ways. What the heck is going on? I'm asking you because I'm having trouble with it.
Well, Jim, I don't know any more than anybody else does. I will tell you this, that there is some reality there because these people sincerely believe that they're telling the truth.
Yeah.
And they're all telling the same story, and they don't know each other. Right down to very small details, but this really bothers me because the story is too much the same, and it smacks of a mind control operation where everybody is given the same story to tell, and somehow this is repressed in their mind and is brought into their memory by some artificial stimulus, physical stimulus at some point in the future.
I would imagine, isn't there a way, or couldn't there soon be a way, which means that somebody like the government could already have it, of beaming a movie, so to speak, directly into your mind?
There is. It's already been done.
I would assume so. I mean, so it doesn't have to be space people doing that.
No.
Martin Cannon, I think you said you have a problem with him, but whatever. I've corresponded with him, and he's the one, who goes by the theory that the government is doing this.
The only problem I have with Martin Cannon is that he's a total and complete emotional wreck. When he really does legitimate research, he does good legitimate research. But
I could believe something like that quicker than I could believe that space people are doing it. And all of this genetic stuff sounds like a Freudian nightmare to me. I mean, real creatures from another planet, which might be 100,000 years ahead of us or 1,000,000 years, how come they're only about 20 or 50 years ahead of us, and how come they're doing a little bit better than us in the genetic area but have to do all of these crazy experiments and all? If they're no more advanced than that, I don't know how they ever got here. Therefore, I don't think they are here.
Well, it could be to give us, to force us to accept something that we would normally reject as being desirable or legitimate. You see, to me, it fits in right in perfectly with the blonde hair, blue-eyed, beautiful men and big-busted, beautiful women who step off of these saucers, saying they're from Venus and bringing us the message of Karl Marx.
Well, I'd rather have them doing that than to have these ghastly little grays. You see, we didn't have any grays until probably the last 10 years. And in the early days, we were talking how I started way back, it was simpler because almost all of these contactees that were around, and I met some of them in Giant Rock, California and elsewhere, and they all told a different story because they'd all been somewhere else and never to the same place, but there were similarities that ran through them, and I always felt, being sort of a liberal sort, even if there isn't a word of truth to it, what they're saying is harmless, it's nice, it was peace and love and kindness, and it was sort of the pre-hippie era, and I thought, well, let them say it, and at least they're being nice, and perhaps there is something ultimately behind it. Now, you've got more evil going on than good. I mean, from what we're talking about and reading about.
Well, this is the
worse.
This is the building of the threat, and it's also telling us and giving us two messages that hey, we're being threatened, and hey, we might have a friend out there. So it's the old bad guy, good guy routine.
That's what. You, I think, are a little bit more biblical than I, and you see the world as a fight between good and evil, and to an extent, who could say that it's not? But I get suspicious when I see space people who have all of our failings. Some of them are real good, and some of them are real evil, and some you're not sure about. And so they're just as messed up as we are. And again, we are projecting our own hang-ups, so to speak, onto these creatures, if indeed they exist. And that makes me awfully suspicious.
Well, it does me too. But one of the things that I get so upset about is especially these people, some of them in the New Age community come to me all covered with fluff and say, Bill, you shouldn't get so upset about this, you shouldn't worry about this UFO thing, you shouldn't worry about the New World Order, because the benevolent space brothers are going to come and save us. And to me, that's the height of folly. It doesn't make any sense at all, even if there were any benevolent space brothers. Why in the world would they save us?
Exactly.
And number two, if we're making such a mess of our own world, who in the world would want to take us back to their world so that we can do the same there, unless we were in chains, And so that really, I have a real problem with that. I also have the problem with the concept that some people like John Lee are saying that they're sucking our blood and they're coming here to eat us. I don't believe that either. I think that we're responsible for whatever is happening on this earth, and I don't think anybody else has got their little finger mixed in it.
Yeah, we can't push our own failures onto a possibly mythical other realm or race. I think we're going to have to deal with this earth by ourselves, or at least make that assumption. I don't think it's just like looking to gods. These space people are gods and they're devils, and I'd rather operate without gods or devils as far as conduct is concerned. And science is something else. Science will tell us someday what, if anything, is behind all of this. I think there is a psychic realm. I think that I indicated earlier, I think there are things, I've had a few experiences myself, I guess almost everybody has, things that you can't explain in the usual five senses, There's something going on. I think there's an overlap between the human mind, between the psychic, and whatever there is to this space business, but what it is, I don't know, but I think there is something very important that science is missing, and someday, as I said before, we might find out. So I can't, the politics of it is one thing, but I can't just automatically write it all off that way, and I don't think you do either. There may be something real going on beside all of this political thing.
Well, I think you're onto something, because for some time now I've been toying with the possibility that somehow science and religion are going to merge at some point, and that is going to form some kind of explanation to a lot of the things that bother us about this and many other things in the world. I think at some point in our history, the two were melded and came apart. And for a long time, maybe didn't even exist, at least in the science part of it during the Dark Ages.
Well, I think astrology was astronomy in the beginning. Mm-hmm. They were the same, and then they split, and now they're quite different. I mean, I think astrology is, in my opinion, nonsense, and you can't say the same for the other because it works.
I'm even seeing articles now that are saying that science and religion are going to make a reconciliation sometime in the future.
And that must be way down the line, because you know religions, how they have specific codes that seem to be antisocial in their implications. I can't imagine.
Well, I think there's always going to be hardcore, extreme fundamentalism and everything. And like I said before, I'm not making judgments on this either way. I try not to do that, because anybody who begins to make judgments on either politics or religions will soon find themselves up to their neck in the honey bucket. Well, if you've ever been to Japan, you know what that is. So I try not to do it. I try to look at opinions. I try to look at articles. I try to do research. I try to put puzzles together without criticizing anyone for whatever they believe, either in a religious or a political bit. You see, I don't care if I really am a constitutionalist. It's okay to me, although I may not believe it, and I may have problems about being friends with someone who worshipped the devil, so to speak. But I would fight for their right to do it, as long as in their worship of the devil they were not hurting anybody else. And if I had a chance to sit down to them, I'd certainly try to talk them out of it. But their right to do it, I would never dispute. It's when they hurt somebody else by exercising their right that things have to stop.
Well, as I've told you, Bill, and I'll say it again, I find you the most interesting person at these conventions, because whether I agree with you or not, every time I go to one of your things, you're expressing new ideas. And I'm a pretty big thinker, I think, but you've come up with a lot of things that I hadn't put together before in the same way. And then I think, well, that doesn't sound reasonable in this case, or that's something I might want to think about or learn more about in a different case. So it's not the same old jazz. I mean, at these conventions, most of it. I mean, why am I here instead of down in somebody's workshop right now? Because the pool is neutral, but I mean, there's people speaking right now in this hotel and telling amazing stories, and I look at the program. I'm not even interested in going down to hear them, and it's a lot of repetition and leading to the same sorts of conclusions. You, as I say, put things together in new ways, and I find it very interesting. Obviously, other people do. You wouldn't be getting as much attention. None of that is meant to imply that I agree with you.
Well, thank you, Jim.
Ray Barker was a great friend of mine, but no one ever felt that he was telling the truth, least of all he himself. He was in the field of the same school of thought, you might say, as Ray Palmer, who was also an entertainer and a wonderful guy. And the successor to all of that, funny enough, is our friend Timothy Green Beckwith. He does today what those men did in their era, and he's doing it quite successfully.
Well, I really like Tim because he's honest. He's an American capitalist. But if he sees a market, he'll fill that market.
He admits he's a promoter, and I can say this because I have the poster at home. He was the producer of a porn film a few years ago. Driller, I think was the name. It was a takeoff on Thriller. I got it backwards. And, his name's right on the poster. And once I asked him, how could you do porn on the one side and New Age on the other? Isn't this kind of contradictory? And his answer was very simple. He says, I give them what they want.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And he's an honest promoter. You can't ask for any more than that.
Right. Everything that I've ever done with him, he asked me to come and speak, and he promotes the thing and puts it all up. It's always been in a handshake. He has never tried to ever take advantage of me. He's always provided exactly what I need when I need it, and that's something that supposedly went out in the last century. Most people, you wouldn't dare even dream of doing business with him on a handshake. But
I've known Tim, for over 25 years. Actually, he was my advertising manager, is what it was, at Saucer News. I had an office in New York City in the late 60s, and when he first got in the field, he came and worked for me on a salary. I mean, I had actual paid people in this office. And then I sort of ended at around 1970, and then he went on and stayed in New York City and eventually inherited some money and did what he's doing now, and he does it quite well.
Yes, he does. Where do you think this is all going to take us, Jim? What do you portend for the future? What does all this mean?
Well, let me try it this way. You know, I didn't know Dr. Hynek awfully well, but I knew him fairly well, and he seemed to be friendly toward me, and he was a smear non-subscriber. And he told me, and I'm sure many, many other people, what his motive in all of what he did was he wanted to learn the truth in his lifetime. And the poor man died of brain cancer, as some of your people will know. And quite obviously, he did not learn the truth in his lifetime, and in certain circles of science, I guess he made a fool of himself. And there are people in the field that think he was too conservative, and others thought he was going off the deep end toward the end. And so many people come along now that knew Hynek, you know, better than they ever did know Hynek. And there's one lady, I can't think of her name, is a story of his having seen top secret documents, you know, and you can't ask him whether that ever happened. The point is, I'm not going to learn the truth in my lifetime either.
I don't think any of us
No, and so I'm kind of disappointed in that way, so I just have become the amateur sociologist, and I enjoy doing what I'm doing here, just carousing with people that I've known and hopefully learning something new once in a while, but it's not that I'm all that smart, but I don't hear much at these conventions that turns me on.
People keep waiting for the government to make a big announcement.
Oh, yeah, well, I've been listening to that since 1954.
Yeah. I think it's a perfect way to keep people hanging on the hook, and it seems to work very well. But I think even if the government were to make an announcement, we'd be absolute fools to believe what they told us, and I don't think we would know the truth even then. And even if it was the truth, I don't think any of us would believe it. Do you?
Well, you pretty well got it, you know. I mean, I don't believe much of what Bush says, and if he made an announcement like that, I'm not sure I believe that either, you know. Why would I just suddenly change my whole attitude about the man?
I will tell you a little secret that I've never told anybody. I called J. Allen Hynek and talked to him one time, and we had a pleasant time. He didn't know who I was, and we never met personally. But we had a nice conversation on the phone, and at one point I asked him, point blank, I said, what do you think all this means? What is the sum total of all of this? And you know what he told me to do? He said, read the books on theosophy.
And what did he mean?
And that's the point where I began my research into the mystery schools.
I wonder why he'd say that.
I don't know. It's puzzled me ever since, and now he's dead, so I can't go back and ask him.
Well, as I say, legends have grown up about him, and I think some of it is kind of tacky, you know. Any famous person has people that know him a lot better than he knows them, you know. It's that syndrome, you know. And when I was Dr. Hynek's right-hand man, you know, that kind of thing, the person that comes to mind first is Willie Smith, Dr. Willie Smith. Do you know him at all?
No, I don't know him, but I've read a lot of letters.
He's an arrogant gentleman, and since we're on the air, I can't make it any stronger than that. I can't tell you what I really think, but I've had some trouble with him. And you get him.
Jim, on my show, you can say whatever you want as long as it doesn't fall under the term of obscenities.
All right, but, well, libel, it doesn't have to be obscene, you know. Slander is what we're doing, not libel, but it doesn't have to be obscene to be slandered.
The only one you have to worry about is yourself, because I have no property, so anybody who wants to sue me will get absolutely nothing, and I invite them to run through the courts until their face turns blue. They still won't get anything because I don't have anything.
Well, Willie Smith, if you listen to him, you know, he was going to take over all of Hynek's files, and I forget what Smith calls his database thing. I can't think of the name at the minute, but he was, you know, the heir apparent to Hynek, and but he's the only one that knows this. I never heard Hynek mention it. And a lot of other people say that Smith is making this up, but again, we can't check with Hynek. People like that really annoy me.
I know what you mean, because I met 4 people who were personal assistants to J. Allen Hynek, and I have no way of knowing if any one of them were or weren't. But
that's exactly the kind of thing that I mean. And one of those people, a lady, claims that Hynek was invited to a base in California, an air base, I guess. And part of the story I like is he's walking along the hall. I guess this lady must have been there with him, or she wouldn't have seen it or whatever. and there's some officers walking down the hall ahead of Hynek. One of them drops this folder, see, and he doesn't bend over to pick it up, so you have to take it for granted that he did it on purpose. So Hynek comes up to the folder as he walks behind the guy, and he wonders whether he's supposed to pick it up, and apparently he is, so he does pick it up, and then it's got all of this pictures of the craft, and all the good stuff is there.
Sounds like
I haven't seen that folder, but it's out there somewhere.
Sounds like the same stuff that was, Linda Howe and me and many other people went through. I think that, in fact, I know no other, if this is real, and if it's really top secret, no other top secret project in the history of top secret projects has been contained in a bucket with so many holes in it. I mean, this bucket is leaking like a sieve, and they're all intentional, and I know they're intentional. And nobody, for instance, what's the guy Graham?
Lee Graham?
Lee Graham.
Yeah.
Lee Graham gets some of William Moore's Majestic 12 stuff and passes it around at the aircraft plant where he works at. And then all of a sudden, here you got the security people sitting him down and questioning him, and he says he got it from Bill Moore, but they never did investigate Bill Moore. Now that's to convince Lee Graham that it's authentic material, but they don't give a damn about where it really came from, because the whole purpose of the operation was to convince Lee Graham that it was authentic, or else William Moore would be in jail right now.
Well, I mean, all these years, going all the way back, there's all of these ex-servicemen who have seen a certain hangar, or they were part of the team that was carrying a body, or saw something loaded onto a truck, or they were here, or they were there. They never have a photograph, only drawings and their own memory, and they never have a piece of metal that's been chopped off or something. There's never any proof. There's an awful lot of people telling similar stories, and you can get carried away with it, but after 40 years, I say, come on. I don't know why they're saying it, but they're not proving it.
Well, I think maybe maybe not all of these cases, but many of these cases, I think that what these people are saying is the truth. And I think that they were set up to see these things so that they would go talk about it, and they were intentionally deprived of having any proof so that they could never substantiate it. Because I think that behind this is some effort to manipulate the people of the world into something. Right now it appears to be a one-world government coming together as one humanity to face this external threat. But we can't prove that either, except that that's where this is going to ultimately lead us, if they can make us think collectively, all of us, that ETs are real, because that's all they have to do is make us believe that. Whether they're benevolent or not, we can't take that chance. We have to form together for our mutual defense if they're real.
That's true. One other point on that other thing, and you and I were talking about this the other day. If a guy has no need to know, and I know that much about security, it's based on need to know. So in so many of these cases, there's a sergeant or something, he's standing out on duty, and another friend of his comes and says, we've got a saucer in this hangar over here. Would you like to come and take a look at it?
Sure.
I mean, it's not credible.
That's why I believe that these people are being set up, and that I don't believe these people are lying one bit. I think they're telling the truth, and what they're saying happened to them really happened, but what they may have looked at was not really a saucer.
Oh, it's so easy to simulate a saucer or an alien body.
Sure.
There's an alien body on...
Take a baboon and cut off its tail, do a little reconstructive surgery on its ears and eyes, and shave it, and you've got a grave.
Well, there's an alien body on the back cover of my book, which was printed by Beckley. Unfortunately, the alien body turns out, as other people discovered, it's a wax dummy that was on display in Montreal, Canada in the early 80s, see?
And here it is wearing a jacket with a zipper.
And so Tim, in deference to the expose, he said that in the next edition he's going to change the back cover. I said, I don't care. I said, I enjoy selling the book. I tell people that I didn't write it. It was ghostwritten for me years ago. It's a story there. But anyway, you can put anything you want on the back cover. I'm no more embarrassed than I would be otherwise. So leave the fake alien, put a new back cover. I don't care. It's all the same to me.
Well, we've got about a minute and a half left, Jim. Can you sum up and just sort of what? You've got a minute and a half. What would you say to the millions of people who are going to listen to this broadcast on shortwave worldwide, all over the world? What
I didn't know
say
that.
to them if you could?
Well, I'd say keep an eye on this subject. There's something to it. There's something interesting here. Keep an open mind, which means, you don't have to believe all of what anybody says, but there is something apparently going on, and as I've indicated, it seems to be beyond our present knowledge as far as science is concerned, and we'll hope that we'll learn more about it, and it won't be easy and it won't be soon, but meanwhile it's a fascinating mystery. Let me put it this way. The human mind wants answers. That's why you have religion. You have a subject where there are no answers, and you invent them if you have to, and that's why people form beliefs, solid, serious beliefs in a subject like this. It has to be this, it has to be that. That gives them an answer, and if they're happy, that's fine with me, but it doesn't mean that it's the answer just because it's their answer. So it's not that simple. You got to face the fact that at a given point in human history, there are things that we don't understand yet, and we can just hope for the best. That's it.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, folks, I told you that would be a good interview, and it was. Everybody has a different viewpoint on the origin and the real story behind UFOs. All I can tell you is that I've discovered that there is a secret hidden technology. And some of that technology, at least, is owned by the United States government and is flown from a super secret test site in the state of Nevada called Groom Dry Lake, or Area 51. I've been out there many times and have videotaped these craft in the air flying, and they do things that absolutely defy the laws of physics as we know them. But we may not really know the real laws of physics. Maybe they perfected a unified field theory and really have plugged gravity into the equation. If that's true, then we may be being set up. In fact, we may have been being set up since the end of World War II when they captured German technology along the lines of disc-shaped flying craft in order to create an artificial alien threat from outer space to bring about the formation of a one-world government where humanity would be willing to give up whatever is needed in order to face that threat. Think about it, folks, because I think that's what's really happening, although I can't explain all UFO sightings, and some of them could possibly be extraterrestrial. But I think if the TV set is broken, it's absolutely foolish to go to the moon to try to get it repaired. And if we see something flying in our atmosphere, it's equally foolish to go to Andromeda to find the answer to it. So, folks, until next time, I really have enjoyed being with you tonight. Tomorrow night, Darlene Sherrill's going to be here talking about fluoridation in water. Absolutely fantastic show. Don't miss it. Good night, and God bless you all.